In the course of writing a piece of music, I'm interested in the music a great deal. I'm not interested in where it came from. I have all sorts of experiences about nature, of course, and I have all sorts of urban experiences, and I suppose they all get mixed up together, and finally peace comes out. That's all I can say.
Pierre Boulez advocated against the primacy of the score, that it isn't absolute. You seem to disagree. How much of the music is open to interpretation? How much freedom should the conductor have?
It's a very interesting question. After all, for those of us who've gone to many concerts, as I used to, you hear, let's say, a ballade of Chopin played by 5 different pianists, and my God, they're very different, and yet it's all the same piece. And I think that the actual composition is not unlike a play. It's like let's say, a performance of Hamlet. The character of Hamlet is acted maybe in 20 different ways, and yet it's always Hamlet. And it seems to me that the score is always sort of is a kind of message to a performer about certain aspects of the intention of the composer and the imagination of the composer, but in the end, the performer himself has to add his imagination to it. Now, you ask me about freedom. By God, I like them to play my pieces pretty clearly, pretty much as they're written. But I do think that even so, it's possible to have it interpreted in many different ways.
He was questioning how a score should be notated.
Each of the instruments has his own kind of
dynamic
speciality. I mean, the clarinet plays a high note, and it's a good deal more piercing, especially in the very highest register, than a flute or piccolo. And yet you write the piccolo with the same. You write the dynamics of both of them the same, which I do, because I expect the performer to understand that. Now, Mahler went through a lot of his scores and fixed it up so that the horn is playing pianissimo while the violin is playing forte, in order to make it balance in some way.
But then the person that looks at the score could have a totally false impression of the
Exactly,
piece.
that's why I don't do it.
That's why I don't think Boulez was
I think,
exactly on
it
the
seems
target
you
there.
write what the general character is. And then, in fact, there are certain early scores of Honegger in which he wrote the dynamics above the score, saying forte, and then everybody had to find out what what forte meant.
Some instruments, when they try to play quietly, are quite loud.
Yeah.
Bass trombone, for example. And if the composer takes that into consideration, as Stravinsky did in some scores also, then when a musician looks at the score, or a conductor, you really don't know what was intended, because if he writes a piccolo triple piano, and then he writes let's pick an instrument, or an English horn triple 40, in order that they balance, you don't really know what it was supposed to be. So in the end, it's better to write what you want to hear and let the players adjust. That's what you say, right?
You want the total effect that you want to hear.
You want to be able to look at a score and know what you're supposed to hear, and then you make the adjustments after that.
And then, of course,
right?
the basic story is that all those old classics of Brahms and the rest was no concern for this. He just writes forte and piano and the rest of it, and it's up to the performers, and they've all, by this time, learned just whether they should play some of the loud parts softly, for instance.
Yeah. How do dialogues relate to your piano concerto? I can hear allusions in the opening cor anglais solo.
The basic problem, of course, is that the piano concerto is for large orchestra and piano. It was commissioned by the Ford Foundation in America. Dialogues was written for a small group. It was written for the instruments that are played here tonight, for pairs of strings and woodwinds. And it presented an entirely different acoustical problem, which was part of the whole idea of dealing with it. So I tried to treat the piano more or less as a chamber music instrument rather than as a big or a sort of rhetorical instrument as you would do in a piano concerto.
What usually starts you on a composition? How do you start? With a theme, a key instrument, or something else? What usually starts you?
I usually start a composition while I'm walking on the street. I mean, a certain kind of texture will come to my mind, how I'd like to have a group of instruments sound together, for instance. Or another time, it's a linear thing, but very rarely do I start with what you might call a theme. I may extend some small idea that I've had into quite a long line, which is a theme, but then very often I don't do that. My compositions, as you've heard, a lot of them are just fragments of themes. They're not actually, the pieces aren't thought that way anymore. I don't think that way. I just think of how, I think differently each time.
Could you tell us about your new opera to be performed at Tanglewood?
It involved, the opera is actually the aftermath of an automobile accident. It starts with that. And the people all revive and they're kind of dizzy. And there's one woman who had just given a concert the night before, and she tries to remember what she was singing. And the entire opera is her aria. And all the other things that she is accompanying, almost all the other things and everything else that people are singing, she's singing always, a few notes here and there throughout, and then the opera ends with her singing High C. And I thought that was quite an idea. I think it's quite sort of fun. I'm writing a horn concerto for the Boston Symphony. That's what's next.
And who will play it? Do you
What?
know? And
The man who's
in the first horn in the
Jamie Somerville.
Oh, yeah, well, he's Canadian. We know him very well. Mosaic is dedicated to Carlos Salcedo.
Carlos Salcedo was of course, a harpist. And he was part of a group who started contemporary music, a small contemporary music society in New York after the First World War. I knew very well. He developed many different ways of playing the harp, of many of which you hear in this harp piece. I feel I'd like to write pieces for the people that I knew that meant something to me long ago.
Do you actually compose every day?
If some problem comes up like if we need new window shades, for instance, I won't think of it. Pull them down and they fall. But I'm writing my piece.
You don't do anything about it anymore.
But it's and that's not bad. That's not good. In the end, you have a lot of trouble with situations like that.
Mosaic. How long would you have worked on that piece? Can you recall?
That took less time than many pieces. I can't tell you why.
Well, because you're concentrating on the harp, probably.
The harp was, the hardest instrument to write for that I write for is the guitar. You never know how far, where they can put their fingers. I mean, and they don't know what the stretches are. The harp is the next to the hardest. And if you try to keep the lady from pedaling on every single note in the piece, which I...
You did a very bad job, I have to tell you.
Well, it's almost as if she were driving a car. Now, look, I think she did very well. And
She did very well. Bravo.
We don't want to single out her alone, but the pianist is extraordinary, too.
David can play everything.
And he has that fast passage where it all noodles around, and my God, that's hard. It's like a tongue twister. No note comes back in the right place. It all goes very fast, and I've wrote it so that the pianist could not beat time with it.